Are you familiar with Sterling Brown's poem, An Old Woman Remembers?
No, I'm not.
It starts with this line. Her eyes were gentle, her voice was for soft singing on the stiff-back pew or on the porch when evening comes slowly over Atlanta. And then she goes on to talk about the riots of Atlanta and then says that the people armed themselves and they sat on their porches, their shotguns oiled and loaded on their knees. And then there weren't any riots anymore. It's a great poem.
Oh, very nice. All right, now what did that poem mean to you?
Well, that's Sterling Brown was one of my professors at Howard, and he told us a lot about his experience in Atlanta and in the rest of the South when he was teaching youngsters back in the 30s and 40s to appreciate their rights and appreciate their culture.
And before we get started, say your first and last name and spell it.
Timothy L. Jenkins, TimothyJenkins.
All right, tell me the years that you worked in Atlanta and what you did there.
Well, Atlanta was kind of the home base for SNCC, so I was in and out of Atlanta, but my home was in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I went to school at Howard University in Washington, D.C. But I was in Atlanta frequently in my capacity first as the National Affairs Vice President of the National Student Association, and then later as a field secretary for SNCC. Atlanta and Mississippi and South Georgia were my primary theaters of activity. And that was started in the 1960s and lasted till 1965.
All right, and then how old were you at the time?
I suppose I would be about 19, maybe 20.
And then if you can, include a bit of my question in your answer.
Oh, okay.
What you just did just now. Okay, so before we started, it was quiet.
You need to carry soundproofing with you.
Yeah, exactly.
Go on the telephone. You gonna be good? I think.
Okay, so how old were you at the time?
Well, my age at that time was probably 19, maybe 20. And of course, the following years it escalated.
Okay, and how was SNCC different from organizations like CORE and SCLC?
Well, SNCC was different from the other civil rights organizations in many respects. First of all, our age was very significantly different than the CORE leadership and the NAACP leadership and the SCLC leadership. And we were, of course, spontaneous in our actions, and most of the other organizations were much more disciplined and coordinated. We were different also in the sense that we didn't have any career interest in the management of the organization, and we always viewed that our participation was likely to be temporary and transient. We were also different in that our concerns never included political sensitivities for outside forces or powers. We had no economic interest in preserving the organization. We did not view ourselves as creating a permanent establishment that would ultimately lead to careers. And that's different than all the other civil rights organizations.
So you guys were sort of the rogue, young gun sort of civil rights movement.
Well, remember that the SNCC came into being after the spontaneous sit-in of the students at the North Carolina A&T. And it was from that demonstration that the publicity arose that black students were defying the segregation rules of the South. And then various movements sprung up around the South, and each one was separate and independent and autonomous. And it wasn't until April that it was decided that we should come together and have some sort of coordination with the advice and leadership of Ella Baker. We had our first conference in Raleigh, and from that, it was decided that we would continue to have these informal coordinating sessions, but the movement wouldn't be controlled by the organization, but by the individual participants.
And then, now what was your strongest memory about being in SNCC?
I think the most important thing was the bond that developed between the people who were SNCC members. We considered that we had a brotherhood that stood for one for all and all for one. And I can say honestly that none of us believed that we would ever be abandoned by our fellow members if we should be arrested or if we should be secluded in dangerous situations. We could always count on one another to come to our rescue. And that was different than the other organizations in the sense that it was a life and death commitment. I believe it was Diane Nash who brushed aside the threat of the Justice Department that direct action could get us killed by saying that we had already written and signed our wills. That meant that we had made a commitment to a life and death struggle forever. That was different than all the other organizations, and it was a unique bond between people as revolutionaries.
And then were you guys like all supportive of one another? Like was it, were you all supportive?
Well, to be sure, we were supportive of one another, but remember, it was basically an autonomous, local-based organization. And the people who were participants were in individual cities and townships, and they had more intimate relationships with one another than to the national body. And it was over time that we realized that we had to have more organization. We had to have a central funding mechanism to keep our efforts alive. We recognized that in dealing with the press, we needed to have some coordination so that the message wasn't misused and abused by the press. And those things led us to greater coordination. We ultimately decided to have an executive secretary. First it was a volunteer, and then it was paid. And then we had a staff that was paid minimally. We were receiving something like $10 or $20 a week. And we were able to then have a more cohesive organization. So it was grassroots, spontaneous, and then later became orchestrated into a Southwide movement.
And then, let's see, the March on Kirk Plaza, organized by SNCC, do you remember that?
No, no, I don't.
And then, more than 4 decades have passed since your participation with SNCC. How did it change?
Well, I don't think it only changed me. I think it changed our country. It was the SNCC affiliate in Atlanta that decided to have a demonstration on the eve of the Nixon-Kennedy election that led to them marching by Dr. King's house and inviting him to participate in the demonstrations, which led to his arrest. When he was arrested, he got a telegram, or his wife, Coretta King, got a telegram from Bobby Kennedy and from on behalf of JFK, indicating that they regretted his arrest and that they would do everything they could to support him. That telegram led to the United Automobile Workers and the United Packing House Workers reproducing that telegram and distributing in all the major metropolitan areas of the United States, Los Angeles, New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Cleveland, telling them that the Kennedy administration had been responsive to the needs of the King family. That resulted in some 250,000 new people who were not planning to vote to participate in that election. Kennedy only won that election by 100,000 votes. So in a real way, you can say that SNCC elected Kennedy President of the United States.
Wow, wow. All right, the Atlanta Inquirer, the paper founded by edited by Julian Vaughn still exists. How important was it as an intra-informational tool?
Well, remember, Julian was also the editor of the SNCC newspaper called The Student Voice. We saw that it was necessary to have media control over the documentation of the activities